Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here. I just finished watching all 10 of Denis Villeneuve's films, and now it is time to rank them. Dune's gonna be on here. Even the ones that are hard to find, I watch them. So get ready, here we go. Number 10 is Maelstrom. Even though I'm not that hot on this one, it's still top 10 Villeneuve. This is Denis Villeneuve's second film, and it's a mixed bag, I'm afraid to report. I don't even really know what the movie's about. The narrative is kind of this winding road where it starts out seeming like it's about the protagonist's guilt over her abortion, and then it kind of wiggles and woozles over and it becomes about her guilt over a car accident. It's also narrated by a fish, and it incorporates fish like metaphorically into the story, kind of in the same way that Enemy does with spiders. This movie was surprisingly quirky and offbeat, which is something I wouldn't expect from his work now, but his first two films are actually a little bit quirky. While I wouldn't accuse the movie of being devoid of substance, nothing about the movie really did very much for me. There were some stylized visual choices that worked for me, but ultimately, I think this is his worst looking movie. I didn't really understand why the contrast was so high and why the blacks were just so overbearing. And the movie he did before this actually looks much better. I just found it kind of forgettable, and I wouldn't really recommend watching the movie unless you're trying to get the cred. Number 9, August 32nd on Earth. This is Denis Villeneuve's first feature film from 1998, and I think it's a pretty strong debut. This one's about a woman who gets in a car crash and then thinks, oh my god, I could die at any time. And then so she tries to convince her best friend to impregnate her. And for some odd reason, they go to the desert in Utah to do it. And I think the movie looked pretty good visually, especially some of the shots in the desert actually did capture that sense of scale that you get with a lot of his films. It used some longer takes and tracking shots effectively. The two lead performances are also captivating, and there's a lot of good romantic tension going on. And while the movie seems to hint that it's doing some sort of like existential musing on death, ultimately what I think the movie ends up saying is pretty simple. Something about saying what you really mean because life is short. Apparently this film screened at Cannes, and it was actually Canada's Oscar submission for international feature that year, so pretty good for a debut film. In short, I enjoyed it. Number 8 is Polytechnique. Villeneuve's third feature is actually about the Montreal Massacre, which was a real school shooting that occurred at a college in Montreal and was motivated by a hatred towards feminists. I think any story tackling real-life tragedies is tricky to handle, and there were times where I wondered how productive it was that Villeneuve seemed to just be dramatizing this event. Like, the bulk of the movie is actually just during the shooting, and we see pretty much every detail of what went on during that time. But the movie definitely finds its purpose towards the end in showing the aftermath of the tragedy from two different perspectives. However, I think maybe the movie could have felt more well-rounded if it dug into some of the issues surrounding the event, maybe tackling the misogyny itself, maybe going a little bit deeper into the characters, rather than spending the time focusing on every move that the killer makes. The camera work here is very dynamic and has a little bit of a looser feel than anything else that I've seen from him. The movie is very distressing, but I think for some people it can provide enough catharsis to be worth the experience. Number 6 is Incendie. And I know that this is some people's favorite Villeneuve film, and some of you are gonna think that this is a very low placement, but Incendie is a very good movie. I do have a mixed relationship with it though. It does feel like the first film where Villeneuve's style was cemented. The three films that he did prior to this one don't really feel like him, like you wouldn't be able to tell while watching it, but I think this one you can. And this was the film that gained him international recognition on a whole new level. It was nominated for the Academy Award for International Feature, and it led to him being able to make the American films that he's making now. This one's about two siblings who embark on a journey to deliver two letters from their mother to their father that they never met and the brother they never knew they had. And on this journey, they learn the miraculous story of their mother and the struggles that she went through growing up in the Middle East during a civil war. The movie is known for having a big shock at the end, and yeah, that twist was totally devastating. But through this twist, the movie observes something deeply empathetic about how easy it is that people can become corrupt in a time of war, and the duality of people. So I do think the movie gets at something really interesting, but some of my issues with the film are that I wonder if the story loses power by being told from her daughter's perspective. because she herself is not very interesting. She's sort of a vehicle for us to learn about the life of her mother, who is the more interesting character. And the movie is about, like, passing a legacy on, and so I see why they framed it that way. But the half of the story that's being told with the daughter, I just don't think is all that interesting because we don't really get a lot of development. The other half is much more interesting with her mother. And yet, because that's sort of the story within this story, the mother's story to me did not feel as intimate as it could have if it was maybe the bigger focus. The shocker of an ending was not quite enough for me to say that this was like one of my favorite Villeneuve films, although that was the moment where I was like, oh, I understand why some people love this movie. And I have to be honest that Denis Villeneuve's slow burn pacing made the whole thing a little bit difficult for me to invest in. I'm generally a huge fan of the pacing that he implements, but it just didn't work for me as well with this movie. That being said, there's a lot here that I do think is really great, and there are a couple scenes that are very powerful, and the final 15 minutes are really thought-provoking. Number 5 is Prisoners. This will probably also be a little bit of a controversial placement because this is another one that some people think is his best film. It's a mystery drama about a father and a detective trying to locate 2 missing girls. The best thing about this film is the acting. Hugh Jackman's performance is absolutely grueling. He would have definitely deserved to be nominated for Best Actor that year. I love the moral ambiguity behind his character, and I love the savage that he becomes in this quest to find his daughter, and the desperation and the urgency in him felt real. I could understand how he could come to that point. All the performances in this movie are brilliant. Jake Gyllenhaal, Melissa Leo, Maria Bello, Paul Dano, Terrence Howard, Viola Davis. My goodness. The performances alone make this such an absorbing watch. I also love how carefully edited and paced it is, and Roger Deakins' cinematography is haunting. The way that the mystery unfolds in this movie is gripping, and I love how this sort of pedophile network that they discover is referred to and represented as this maze. I love the idea that the characters are getting deeper and deeper into the maze. And yet this leads into my overarching issue with the movie, which I also would need to get into spoilers to explain. So if you don't want spoilers, you can skip to this part of the video. All right, now we're talking spoilers. The movie hints at this idea of an unsolvable maze, which is a terrifying idea, especially if you're a father whose family is depending on you to locate their daughter and save her life, or you're a detective who has a perfect streak of being able to solve cases. Keller and Loki's worst nightmare is to be caught in a maze that they cannot get out of. They're obsessed with the need for answers. And yet, in this movie, they do get to the bottom of it, and everything's kinda tidy at the end. We know that he's gonna retrieve Hugh Jackman from the hole. Yes, there's going to be lasting damage, psychologically, but it just feels like everybody got caught who was involved. Everyone that needed to be rescued got rescued. Nothing really lingers that deeply for me. And if you look at the way that the events unfolded, it actually was necessary for him to torture Paul Dano. That led directly to him getting to his daughter. So the event that is the most morally questionable in the film feels weirdly justified. Make of that criticism what you will, but that's just my main complaint with Prisoners. Other than that, though, the movie is thoroughly entertaining and gripping and distressing, and it's extremely well acted. It works really well as an experience from front to back. It just doesn't linger the way that I wish it did. Number 5 is Dune. If there's one thing that Denis Villeneuve accomplished with Dune, it's that he made a movie that just feels massive. It feels gargantuan. It's huge. Hans Zimmer's booming score, the immersive, almost overbearing sound design, flawless visual effects, the shot compositions that make you feel the scale of these images. The world building here is really front and center. The sandworms. The movie strives to be no less than the next Lord of the Rings or the next Star Wars. And I don't think we're gonna know if it is that until we get that sequel. I actually suspect that part 2 is going to be better than part 1. Part 1 delivers on setting up the world, setting up the tone, and delivering some incredible action sequences. But I am of the opinion, and I know not everybody agrees, that the character development and the character work here is lacking. And though I don't think the heart of this movie is necessarily non-existent, I think it is less prevalent than maybe any of his movies. I didn't find there to be that much interesting about Timothée Chalamet's journey. It's more the potential for where it can go that's interesting. And from what I hear, the second half of the book, that's going to be part 2, is going to delve much heavier into subverting our expectations and giving us more character development. So I'm hyped. I'm pumped for that. And we officially got a green light on that. But I really do like Dune for all its booming IMAX glory. The action is exciting not because of like the combat going on screen necessarily, but because of the weight that Villeneuve gives to these scenes. He is trying to up the ante on how big a blockbuster can feel, and there aren't really a lot of directors who are doing that right now. It is possible that when we get Dune 1 and 2 and you put them together, that piece of work becomes one of Villeneuve's very best movies. But for now, this is where part 1 stands in his filmography, in my opinion. Number 4 is Enemy. I got a lot out of rewatching this movie. I hadn't seen it since 2013, but 8 years later, I just think it's such an intriguing little puzzle. Jake Gyllenhaal delivers what is one of his best performances throughout his whole career, and I think his work here is very underrated. Sarah Gadon is also really good. The film unfolds in such a quiet way, but it feels like a thriller. It's exciting just on a surface level of watching this guy discover that he has a duplicate version of himself who looks and sounds exactly like him. But the film really makes no sense if you try to break it down from a logical perspective on like what happened here and where was this character during this time. The movie really can only be explained and broken down psychologically because it's a representation of what's going on in this character's head. It's about somebody who struggles to maintain a normal relationship, who can't resist their own impulses and urges, and who's gone so far as to fracture their sense of self over this. Watching this a second time, I really saw how many little pieces there were to pick up on, and even skimming through the movie a little bit after that second watch, I was even picking up on more. In fact, if you watch the end of this movie, and then you watch the beginning, there are a couple clues here that this is actually like a loop. The movie loops, and in a way it goes on forever to represent like the cycle that this guy is going to go through his whole life. And it makes me want to watch it again. I love the minimal score here. I love the bassoons. I love the hazy green yellowish color of the movie that gives Montreal like this otherworldly feel. It does a great job of utilizing its location to make the movie feel like it exists in a world of its own with just a limited budget. And I think it's Denis Villeneuve's strongest work as a writer. Number 3 is Blade Runner 2049. This is where his movies enter like all-timer territory for me. This top 3, all 10 out of 10s. All 10 out of 10s. And I did not think Blade Runner 2049 was a 10 out of 10 the first time I watched it, but I rewatched it last week and it's a great movie. First of all, what a miracle it is that this movie exists and is really good. Hollywood produced a sequel to a groundbreaking, visually stunning, thought-provoking sci-fi classic, and not only was it not dumb bullshit, like the Ben-Hur remake or something, but it can stand toe-to-toe with the original in many ways. And it's clear that Denis Villeneuve is maybe one of the only directors, if not the only director, who could have pulled this off. This is just one of the most stunning looking movies that exists. The gloomy, dark, concrete, neon look of the city is just beautiful. The movie has some of the most immersive. My brain was about to combine immersive and intricate. The movie has some of the most immersive and intricate production design that I've ever seen. And Roger Deakins' cinematography, I mean. Some of the environments here, the city, the seawall, the orange land, shit looks incredible. The fight scene with the animatronic Elvis going on in the background is a masterpiece of sound design. The detail of like the little like, you can hear the lights flickering, but there's no sound going on. It's just, I eat it up. And the score, which is in the shadows of one of the best and most influential scores of all time, is excellent. The synths are sometimes soft and alluring, sometimes rough and grating and acidic. It's insane that this movie got snubbed for score, especially when The Last Jedi and 3 Billboards could have easily just not been there. But aside from the crafts, I think that this movie is a thought-provoking examination on what it means to be human. Kay's journey of trying to figure out what makes his existence and his life and his experiences valid mirrors any existential journey that any human being has ever been on. There's an incredible observation made here where Kay is looking through DNA at how we're all coded with like GCAT, and then Ana de Armas like floats through his face and is like, I'm just made of zeros and ones. I'm made of 2 digits. And it's like, fuck, we're literally coded the same way as the replicants are. Is the sensation of a replicant recalling a memory any different from the way that we recall our memories? And if you think about it, aren't our memories like really everything we have? What I also picked up on the second viewing is how this is a story of class rebellion, where the system that this world stands on relies on keeping replicants in their place, making sure that they internalize the idea that they are less than human, so that they can act as servants. That angle made the movie really tangible to the real world that we live in. So yeah, I think this is a great movie. really thought-provoking. One of my favorite science fiction movies from the last decade, but not my favorite. Number 2 is Sicario. This is maybe Villeneuve's most underrated film. A lot of people don't have this in their top 3, and I'm like, why wouldn't you? Also, just the way that this movie was just totally undervalued as an awards player, I do not understand it. I do not understand it. It's a gripping thriller about the drug war that the US is waging in Mexico. The opening shot is a banger. The opening scene's a banger. The traffic jam scene at the border and the build up to that scene. When I watched this the first time, I was like, okay, that's gonna be the best scene of the movie. Like, most movies do not get that good. But from the tunnel onward, at the end of this movie, like, the movie at least ties that. Watching this movie, I just feel blessed with how many amazing scenes we get back to back to back. Roger Deakins' cinematography, like, some of the best work that he's ever done. Johan Johansson's score makes you feel like you are descending into the pits of hell. Great nomination, by the way, when they nominated that. The movie is a masterclass in suspense. Just watch the scene leading up to the traffic shootout. The editing is so beautifully orchestrated as we sit beside Emily Blunt's character, just absorbing the world. Then we switch to a helicopter shot. Then we switch to a shot where we're riding on the back of one of these trucks, just storming through the city, heavily armored, and then we cut to a shot where there are just civilians playing in the park, and they're totally desensitized to the whole thing. Look at the tunnel scene. You don't see anybody get shot in the tunnel, and yet it's so intense and one of the most thrilling scenes in the movie. The night vision, the shot where the soldiers descend into the darkness. Just an incredible way to build up the scene, and a very clear visual metaphor for the descent into darkness that the character takes during this movie, which also recalls the descent into darkness that the character undergoes in Apocalypse Now. The film gets darker and murkier as we discover the truth of what's really going on with the US's strategy in the drug war, and as we discover the hell and the cruelty that goes on in these conflicts. Sicario really fits into the war genre more than anything else. It disillusions us to the idea that the US is doing anything productive there, or the illusion that we can win the war. Sounds a little bit like what was going on in the Middle East too, with the revenge plot and the regime change shit. And looking up some people's analysis of the film, I'm seeing a lot of people who miss the goddamn point. There are people who think that the actions of Alejandro and all the military boys are justified in the end. If you think the movie is about how what they were doing was the right thing to do, even though it was lawless, you are missing the point. The last shot. The last shot. This is a cycle of violence that's going to continue no matter how much military we send in. And that's the truth of the drug war, of how futile it is. Taylor Sheridan knows that the drug war isn't productive. And the way that his script satirizes the masculinity surrounding the military strategies. If you came away thinking the boys knew how to handle this, I'm afraid you weren't paying attention. And before I cap this off, Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, and Benicio del Toro. Incredible performances from those three. And the number 1 film is Arrival. As great as Sicario and Blade Runner 2049 are, this was a no-brainer for me. This is one of my favorite movies ever. And this movie just captures what Villeneuve does best. He creates a visual and auditory experience for you that heightens the eventual emotional impact and gives the whole film a sense of discovery. This film is also a masterclass in suspense. I mean, Villeneuve gives like 5 minutes to this moment where they're just slowly approaching the ship. And you just take in the suspense and the awe of that moment with incredible sound mixing, beautiful cinematography. Where's Bradford Young? Where did Bradford Young go after this movie? What he did here was easily on par, if not even like topping, Deakins' work in Villeneuve's films. And Greg Fraser's as well. I don't know if I've ever felt so awe-stricken at a movie. There's just such a palpable sense of discovery, of venturing into the unknown, and it doesn't need a wormhole to do this. The movie actually operates in like pretty limited environments, and yet you still feel like you're in the midst of something extraordinary and majestic. And in taking that plunge into the unknown, we do surface with a really profound perspective on life and how humans view the past, the present, and the future. I think this movie does no less than try to change the way that you look at your life. It offers the catharsis that you're merely trapped in your perception of linear time. And it shows how if we could remove those barriers, it would be easier for us to choose love over fear. And the way that that message hits with the final twist in this movie, just one of the most impactful moments I've ever witnessed in cinema. This is my favorite twist out of any movie I've ever seen because of the emotional weight it carries. And I think so many twists risk the danger of drawing attention to themselves and how cool it was and how much I didn't expect it, but few actually have this impact. It serves a thematic purpose, and it's as revelatory for us to witness it as it is for Louise to have it. It absolutely blew my mind, and it's very difficult for me to have my mind blown in a movie. And Amy Adams is just so brilliantly subtle. It's still disturbing that she was not nominated for the Academy Award. And as with Sicario, Johan Johansson's work here as the composer is miraculous and otherworldly. The way that he uses vocal samples. With this score and with Sicario, he was easily becoming one of my favorite composers. And with Mandy, I still just think like, man, like what else could we have gotten out of this guy if he lived longer? But I think I've said all I need to about that. Arrival, easily topping the list. Hope you enjoyed my thoughts on all these movies. You probably disagreed with some of them, but that's okay, because you probably agreed with others. Give your ranking down in the comments. What's your favorite of his? Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. What would you do if Denis Villeneuve came to your house with a knife?